Hi everyone! I'm back with another video, Bougie and Pink, and today we're going to be talking about my thoughts on thrifting and why I feel like I'm not going to be thrifting anymore, to be honest. And just why I feel like it's not for me, because I feel like I don't really see a lot of people talking about thrifting in this way. It's always like, oh, this is thrifting, this is why I thrift, these are all the good reasons for thrifting and everything. And I feel like there's a lot more depth and perspective to thrifting as we know it, and it's kind of like seen as like this like general thing that everyone should be doing if they want to be a sustainable person. But in reality, like what is thrifting actually doing? So first things first, before I get into my personal opinion about why I've decided to leave thrifting behind and not thrift anymore, I wanted to get into the history of thrifting because I think it adds a lot more layers onto my own opinion. If that makes sense. I'm gonna be honest, I am not a scholar. I am not, an expert on anything pretty much. But I will say that I did look up a lot of sources that I will mention. I just will put the links that I read about in the description box if anyone's interested in going and looking at those and taking their own look at things, just so it's not just from me and my opinion. But yeah, let's just get into it. So I've got so many notes because I'm a note taker. So basically, the word thrifting was not necessarily what it was called, but thrifting has been around for, at least from what I've looked at, the Elizabethan period in England. Kind of like that was, it was still, there was a concept of this idea in that time period. And basically, like the giving and taking of clothes, that were secondhand was something that was practiced. But in terms of the concept that we see today, really started during the Industrial Revolution. And basically what happened was most people, just bought their clothes and kept their clothes for a really long time, basically, and if your clothes were kaput, you just fixed them, you used it for something else, you made something else out of it. So clothes are pretty much like something that you carried with you for life. But during the Industrial Revolution, it made clothes be able to be produced faster, as we all know. Like, you could produce products a lot faster, basically through this factory process that was being developed at the time. And so basically that enabled companies and businesses to be able to produce a lot of items. And at the same time, during the Industrial Revolution, you also have an influx of, because I guess my research is kind of America specific, which if I have any international viewers, I definitely recommend kind of looking at how that started maybe in your country too. So basically with the Industrial Revolution going on and able to produce all these goods, you also have an influx of immigrants to the US and helping to produce these items. And basically because of this, enabling of production, there's so many a lot of people gradually started moving away from oh, I only wear these clothes for the rest of my life, or this is how I do it, I sew this. A lot of people were more able to buy clothes throughout their lifespan instead of just having a static, a more simple amount. And so basically introduced this new possibility of oh, you can get new clothes. And you also at this time see the rise of department stores and stuff like that, where people can go shop leisurely and get all these new items that usually would have taken a long time to do. Because of this, more and more people started to end up with excess clothing. As they acquired new items, they had items themselves that they did not use, wanted to do something with, and they had, no way of real static place of putting these things. And initially what was known as thrifting to us now was called a junk shop. And basically the predominant group that did this was Jewish immigrants, and they would sell from push carts and everything and stuff like that, or different stores, but they had this negative connotation towards them because of stigma against Jewish people. But basically that's kind of where a lot of people in my research credited like a lot of the stigma about thrifting to come from basically the people who sold it. So people would give their items to these junk shops, and you could go buy those things from the junk shops. And because of the people who were predominantly selling them, immigrants, mainly Jewish immigrants, maybe a lot of other people who were also considered to be, lower tier at the time, selling these things there, and there we get the stigma about thrifting, thrift clothes. So at the same time, we had like a lot of Christian ministries that wanted to find a way of making money for their outreach, because at the time you have people going all over the place, spreading their beliefs and everything, and they're also trying to find funding for these things. And so a lot of them turned to what was known at the time as junk shops. And so basically they would, acquire all these items. And they kind of changed the idea of junk shops. Like they literally changed the name over time from like junk shop to thrift to make it sound more nifty. And then because it's like, this outreach mission that you're donating to, it became like this more charity thing that gave people a feeling of virtue, like, oh, I donate to here, I'm doing good. And these Christian orgs would also hire people, not necessarily hire them, but have people work for them in exchange for board, food, and everything else, so they could get those things by basically helping to run these businesses. And they essentially were able to tie like charity and capitalism together. So basically you can donate and feel good that you're not throwing your clothes in the trash or something, and feeling like you're doing something good, and we get your items and we can sell those to make money for our causes. And so basically this kind of evolved throughout the 20th century. The Great Depression was a period where thrift shops were very heavily strained, because a lot of people at the time did not have money to go buy new clothes. So at the time the supply for those shops really dwindled. But after the war period, you have World War II, and then after and then after, during the 1950s, there was a huge rise of people who had that kind of income you can spend, disposable income. So a lot of people had more disposable income, so they were buying new items, and then these shops started getting a lot more items because people could donate more because they had more disposable income. And so basically you have like this ramping up of this whole like system. You still have that kind of negative stigma about secondhand clothes that came kind of from the person who was selling it initially, or the people who were selling it. But as you go, it kind of gets more and more refined, or more a charitable gesture. And then you get to the 1950s too, where they started consignment shops and consignment shops and vintage stores for more wealthier people. And it was like you can still donate, but it was like this whole idea of vintage became really cool, and buying vintage items also became really attractive. And so that's also another avenue to thrift that emerged at the time. And then basically the workforce of these stores has always consisted of, because I would say still today, a lot of the employees at these stores tend to be, I know for like one specific charity that is local to me, a lot of them tend to be people who were recently incarcerated, got out, and were able to find work at that area. And then it also tends to be a lot of basically like a way for a workforce for a lot of people to get income and get goods and services also into that. But one function of these thrift stores that I thought was really interesting when I was looking was that a function of them also helped to teach people how to become consumers, especially people who were immigrating in at the time, who were kind of just introduced to this like whole system of shopping and buying. And so basically it encouraged people to kind of like buy all these new items and stuff like that. And then if you had items, you can just give them here, do your charitable thing, and then get new things. So kind of like continue to cycle. And so that's how we get to kind of today what we have for thrifting. And so it's like, okay, I feel like it really is very similar to its beginning. I don't feel like it's changed. And it's like, oh, so this was like how it always was, I guess. Because in my opinion, when I was thinking about thrifting, I was like, because my experience recently was I've bought a few items from thrift stores. I used to thrift all the time when I was in high school. Like, I really, really loved thrifting because I could find like really cute, quirky stuff that you can't really find on the racks in a store. And I could, make really good items with that. And sometimes it was the easiest way to get clothes when, maybe you're like working from a budget and you don't have a lot to spend on, new clothes. So, that's how my experience was with it. But I did notice kind of like at a certain point, it picked up a lot more to where it was like thrift stores were kind of also like raising their prices to a level that stores that sell new were also at. And I think there's like a good example of like online websites who sell items. There's a lot of like Fashion File or The Real will sell like high-end items at discounted prices because they're new or their condition is different, but they do also offer them at the top tier. And I guess I'm not necessarily talking about those kinds of websites. I'm more talking about like kind of your regular, just people donate these clothes. And I just started to notice that the price of those items was kind of almost at level with what a newer item would cost. And I would really credit that maybe to like the rising popularity of thrifting in like our recent, history, where a lot of people have like started to thrift a lot more, and in turn like a lot of thrift stores have begun to raise their prices to kind of match the market. Although, and in my opinion, it's like, well, if all these items, first of all, I guess the reason I did my research was because I was like, well, if these items are for people who cannot afford, cheaper clothes, who cannot afford new clothes, then that's kind of cutting them out, because if they can't afford to buy a new item and the thrift store clothes are at the same price as the new item, then why are they supposed to buy clothes, But kind of looking at the history of thrifting, in my opinion, it does not seem like it was ever kind of like that. It was more kind of a way for organizations to make money to fund their purposes and businesses, and their outreach, not necessarily to make a way for people who could not afford clothes to buy them. Because you kind of see in the whole kind of history of it, it's like, okay, so people buy a lot of clothes. They can't wear all those clothes, so they give them to us. And then because of that, because it's donated, we started ground zero, no cost to us, but then we can make this money off of it. So basically, like, it's kind of like, okay, so if you get them for free and people need clothes who can't afford them, why the cost there? You know what I mean? I just think it's like, it's another business that doesn't necessarily help those who need it. I would say it does tend to be cheaper than, and this is all my personal opinion, sometimes it can tend to be cheaper than going into a regular store. In my recent experience of like, let's say the past 6 months, I have not really experienced that, to be honest. If I'm being honest, I think sometimes I'll run across the item, I'm like, okay, this maybe looks like equal to the price of a clearance item in an aisle, like maybe it's like the clearance item in the store, but it's still never like, okay, this is a significant drop from going out to a different shop, like I don't see it being that affordable. And it's like, if someone is already, in a thrift store trying to buy clothes because buying newer clothes is difficult, then why is the price so still here? Especially if it's donated, especially if it's donated. Because it's not like there's an overhead cost, for buildings, facilities, obviously to fund outreach, but I think the price hike that it is at is questionable, is very questionable, because it's like, how does that make sense? There has to be a a base level where everyone wins that isn't this high. And recently I went and I bought and I bought a pair of shorts that was like $7.99, I want to say, probably between $7 to $9. And I was like, okay, this doesn't feel that cheap, but okay. And then I remember going to a different store to buy clothes. It was a new store, and the price of the item was lower than what I had spent in the thrift store. And I was like, how does that make sense? That I don't get it. Like that's questionable to me. And I know someone could ask me like, okay, well, if you think thrift stores are for people who cannot afford clothes, who cannot afford new clothes, but you can, then why are you at a thrift store? And I think it's a really good question. And my answer would be, I feel like it's marketed two ways. It's marketed like, okay, this is supposed to help people who can't afford to buy clothes. But then when you're in a thrift store and you're looking at the prices, it's like, this is priced for people who can buy clothes. So it's like, who is supposed to be in here? And my answer is, I don't think thrift stores, and why I kind of don't want to support that anymore is because I don't think thrift stores are actually for people who can't afford to buy clothes. Like, the prices don't make sense. And I'm like, if this is adjusting for inflation, because at a certain point, the economy changes throughout history. Prices aren't going to be like 2 cents, like they were in the 50s. At the same time, it's still like, this is like the price as a new item. I know I keep repeating myself, but I'm hoping that I'm making sense. And then a lot of people are like, well, I will shop at a thrift store because I want to shop sustainably. And I want to make sure that I'm not, creating more waste for the environment and stuff like that. Which I was also part of that too. I was like, okay, if I shop here, I'm not making all these clothes that'll just end up in a landfill and kind of disturb the environment and all that other stuff. But even with thrifting, it's not necessarily like a loop around that, because when you really look into thrifting and what happens to these items after the store, like, just checking my notes again. So basically, when you donate something secondhand to a thrift store, then they do an initial take, and basically what people give that cannot even make it to the rack will most of the times be turned into textile recycling. So they'll just put it into a form that can be recycled and therefore not harm the environment and all of that. And I feel like that version is really pushed, and it is done, but behind the scenes, most like 2/3 of what cannot be even make it to the store part is put in a landfill anyway. So as much as it's like, okay, we're recycling these items, more of it is ending up in a landfill from the get-go. So it's still not necessarily circumventing that whole landfill thing. It is probably going in there not at the same rate as like, fast fashion clothes or clothes that kind of just go straight to waste, but it's not necessarily not doing the same thing. And then with the clothes that do make it to the racks but don't sell, most of them are bundled up and sent to countries abroad, mostly what we would like global south countries, or what we would also maybe term third world countries, sent there to be sold to those industries to make profits as well. Unfortunately, though, this kind of exchange has pretty much destroyed the local textile industries in the countries that get these products. So a lot of people are not able to, start their own businesses selling their own clothes where they are, because they have to compete with these like really cheap clothes that just keep coming in influx, because of course there's a ton of clothes that we wear, we spend on every year, and so that kind of floods that industry and makes it really difficult for people making their own clothes, their own textiles, to compete. And in addition, the condition of some of these clothes when they do arrive in these countries is not even wearable, and so they end up being burned to get rid of, just because there's so many of them at certain points. So with that being said, it's like, for me personally, I feel like I thrifted initially because, I was on a budget and I wasn't in a position to be able to buy new clothes all the time. And so I was like, I loved fashion and I wanted to participate in fashion. And I was like, this is a really fun way to get clothes. I can afford this. I can find really cute things. And me and my sister would make a big deal about finding, these items that are discounted that we could get, like finding name brand stuff that we could wear and afford. And so that's how I got into thrifting. And then kind of as I, went through different stages of life and was able to do more, I kind of still went back to it as a nostalgia, but I had noticed like throughout those years that it started to change into something that was unrecognizable to me. And that being like this kind of more wealthier or niche thing that I feel like isn't necessarily like conducive to everyone. And I do think I don't know. I just feel like it's more like a business than a charity, because a lot of the features of it, even historically, run more than a business than a charity. And I think that's really why it's so much considered better. It's like, oh, you're not, but wasting money on new clothes. And it's like, well, okay, but then why am I paying new clothes prices at certain points? And then another argument is, okay, well, I want to be sustainable and not contribute to waste. But when you learn what happens to clothes when they're being thrifted, then it's like, this is still making waste. So I just don't think it's for me anymore. I don't know. It's not necessarily like a discount store anymore, in my opinion, but it's not, a good option for sustainable all the time. And really, it's like, okay, if I want to be sustainable and not be wasteful with my clothes, okay, what am I supposed to do at this point? And basically, I think most people who are in the philosophy are already thinking like, just buy less clothes, like if you don't need something, or just be really mindful when you're shopping. Like, don't just go out and just, compile this whole wardrobe that you don't know what to do with and everything. Like, just be mindful every time you buy something, and make sure that you're really going to use that whole thing. Like, buy items that you could have and pass down, or that you could keep for a long time. And those tend to, spending more money on items like really good quality shoes or really good quality shirts, those will really take you further than trying to do all these different loopholes to avoid spending in fast fashion. But yeah, that's my opinion. I feel like I talked about it a lot. If this was kind of I don't really have anything else to add to that. I feel like I talked a lot. And this is also a video I really wanted to do. And I also want to do more talking videos where I just share my opinions about things. I feel like my next videos on this will be less sporadic. I'll have more notes, but definitely something that I wanted to talk about and just share with you guys. If you have any comments, if you disagree with me, if you're like, no man, you're completely wrong, leave it in the comments. I'm very interested in what everyone thinks about this topic, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. But as for me, I'm done thrifting. I'm done. But this is Bougie Yang and Pink. It was so nice talking to y'all today. Have a good day, and bye.